Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Gayest Generation, where we hear LGBTQ older adults speak for themselves. Each episode, we sit down with a different member of the LGBTQ community who laid the foundation for the freedoms we have today. Their stories make noise where there is silence, and that silence has lived for far too long. It's about time we let their voices fill the room. In this episode, we speak with Kansas State Congresswoman Stephanie Byers. We learn what it's like to be one of the first openly transgender people elected to a state legislature. We learn about what it's like to grow up as a member of the Chickasaw Nation and what it means to live life authentically. This is the Gayest Generation. How about you tell us your name, your age, and how you identify?
My name is Stephanie Byers. I'm 58 years old. My pronouns are she and her.
I'm very glad to be here with you today, Stephanie, and to get to talk to you again. Now, for our listeners who might not be familiar with your name, Stephanie is the first openly transgender person elected to the Kansas State Legislature, also the first openly transgender Native American person elected to a U.S. state legislature. Do I got that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. I didn't want to I'm just, what is it like to be a first?
You know, there's responsibility that comes with being first. And, you know, the hope is that I may be the first, but I shouldn't be the only, that we will see others that come through. They can learn from the experience that I had, just like I learned from the experience that Danica Rome provided and that Brianna Tissone provided. And those folks that walked that path ahead of me, maybe in different locations, but we've learned kind of how to navigate these waters as a trans person when you run for office.
Absolutely. And I'm very interested, and I believe the people listening to this would be very interested to know how you got to where you are today. And the best place to start is the beginning, right? So where were you born?
I was born in 1963 in Norman, Oklahoma. And for the first part of my life, up until I graduated college, I was a resident of Oklahoma. I lived mostly in Norman and did not go to the University of Oklahoma. I went to a conservative Christian university, Oklahoma Christian University in Oklahoma City. Lived in Edmond, Oklahoma. I was going to school there. And then when I first got out of college, I was a December graduate. I'm an education major. Trying to find a teaching job in January can be an interesting struggle. I was fortunate that I found a job very quickly. It was at a private high school. And unfortunately, that high school was going bankrupt, and we didn't know it when I got hired on. So my first teaching job only lasted 6 months, and the school went bankrupt. And I spent some time looking for another teaching job after that and struggling to find one. I ended up actually sitting on the back of a tractor at the college that I graduated from and mowing the North 40 on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah.
And then eventually a job opened up for me in northeastern Colorado. And I taught in a rural community in northeastern Colorado for a year. From there, moved to a suburban community in Arizona. I taught in Gilbert High School and a couple of the junior highs that they were called then in Gilbert, Arizona, which is a suburb of Mesa, which is a suburb of Phoenix. And I taught there for a year. And then job opened up in Wichita, Kansas, and I moved here in 1990 and have been here ever since. And I taught in Wichita schools for 29 years total. The only 1 year as kind of an itinerant band director, and lived out of my car, went to a lot of different schools and taught. But then the following year became the director of bands and orchestra at Wichita High School North, which is one of the largest public high schools in the state of Kansas. And I was there at Wichita North for the remainder of my career, retiring from there in 2019.
Oh my gosh. And I do have here in my notes that you were GLSEN's Kansas State Educator of the Year, as well as GLSEN's National Educator of the Year. Now that's pretty cool.
It was a very big surprise. My principal, I began living authentically as myself in 2014. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that I had already worked in that particular school from Wichita North from 1991 until 2014, and then changed my gender as far as everyone else knew, and finished out the rest of my career there, and did so with complete full acceptance. It's just amazing, from the students, from the faculty, the staff, and the alumni, the parents. It was just a gracious warmth that enwrapped me when I made that transition. But my principal called me up one day and he said, "I don't know if you know about GLSEN, but I've nominated you for this award."
Wow.
And then sent me a copy of the letter that he wrote. And of course, he didn't know, but at that time I had already been doing work for GLSEN. I had gone through some of their facilitator trainings. And so there were things that I already had a relationship with them, but it was the GLSEN National Educator of the Year Award actually preceded the GLSEN Kansas Educator of the Year Award.
I see.
And so the national award, I was one of, I think, of 155 different people that had been nominated. And they looked at what was sent in my application. They asked me for a statement. So I wrote them a one-page statement about what it is, who I am and what I do. And then they did a video interview. And then following all of that, they selected me and flew me to New York City for their Respect Awards that year.
And it's fantastic.
Yeah, it was a very, very, very cool thing, very fun thing.
I have a question for you. And as a former educator myself, it is a question that people have asked me a million times, and they don't always ask it in a nice way. So I'm going to ask it to you the way that it's been asked to me. Now, why in the world would you want to be a teacher?
I tell you what, there's a lot of different things that come about. I think for some people, teaching is choice. They decide sometime early on that this is what they want to do. For some people, it's a calling. There's just some inexplicable force inside them that says you need to be teaching people. And for me, it was kind of a combination of stuff. It really, the field that I taught in was band and orchestra, and as a beginner in band in the 6th grade at Washington Irving Middle School in Norman, Oklahoma, my band director, Chuck Papan, taught all of us some very unique things about how to appreciate each other. At that time, Washington Irving was not on the good side of the tracks in Norman, Oklahoma. It was in the tough part of town. And most of us that went to school there were lower middle class and low class kids. I mean, we were struggling, the horn that I played on, my dad had played on in the 7th grade in the 1950s, and my great grandparents had bought it for him from a pawn shop. So, this horn had been through the ringer, but Mr. Papan taught us that it didn't matter. It didn't matter what it was, because talent was what we developed within ourselves. Dignity and respect is what we could apply to absolutely everybody, regardless of whether they were wealthy or poor, or, had shoes with holes in them, or the latest pair of Nikes that anybody had ever seen, and there was something that resonated with me. And I decided then at that point in time in 6th grade that I was going to be a high school band director, that was going to be my job. That was going to be my life, that I was going to make music for the rest of my life.
So you are a lawmaker. You are a nationally recognized retired teacher. You're a musician and a band director, but you're also a member of the Chickasaw Nation. Can you talk to me a little bit about your background and what does it mean to be a member of the Chickasaw Nation, or what does it mean to be Native American in America today?
One of the things that we forget about when we talk about Native America, that we are not talking about one single entity. We're talking about over 500 federally recognized tribes, each one an independent nation, each one having their own cultures, oftentimes their own languages, and how a lot of that overlaps. We're also talking about a group of individuals that were subjected to the federal government's outright cultural extermination. There was a time and that we've seen resurface lately with the discovery of bodies on old Indian boarding schools that we're seeing this brought back up, that there was this idea that if you could save the man if you could kill the Indian. And so there was an active way of trying to remove Native American culture. And the Chickasaws, even though they were one of the tribes that were part of the early removal that took place in the 1830s and moved from their homelands into Oklahoma, they were subjected to that same cultural displacement, if you want to call it that. And so our culture as a tribe changed in ways, some ways that we can't even figure out because we don't have those ancestors there to explain them. We have histories have been handed down. And in my own particular family, there's a fracture in that culture. My Native American side comes through my grandfather, my dad's father. And my grandfather was killed in a car accident when my dad was only 18 months old. And so that there's a disconnect there. My dad was raised by his mom, his mom is white. And that's pretty much the Chickasaw tradition as well, is that you were raised in your mother's culture. And my grandfather had 6 brothers and a sister. And those brothers and sisters would come in and check on my dad on a regular basis. So my dad gained some of that culture there. But because we don't have that relational taking place in the home, we don't have the family recipe for pashofa or fry bread or something like that. Because we don't have that, we did have my dad's mom and then my dad, an encouragement that we should learn about our culture. And so we read books. We read all kinds of things. So my knowledge of who I am as a Chickasaw is based somewhat on the culture handed to me, but it's also based upon what I have read. Mm-hmm. And I think that more than likely, I represent kind of what most Native Americans are at this point, that we are descendants of people, that our cultures are different than what they may have been at one point in time. And we're looking for that identity, for those connections that draw us back. Because whether you believe that there's some sort of a cultural memory buried in our DNA, there are things that surface sometimes that you just kind of wonder, where'd that come from? And then you read a story from the Chickasaws and it's like, well, that sense of humor is my sense of humor. Is that coincidental, or is that because my dad has the same sense of humor? Was that my grandfather's sense of humor? Because that seems to be like a cultural trait with Chickasaws, and so we see those things. And again, having the opportunity to be a voice for Native American communities in federal government and state government, we forget how much impact our levels of government have had on tribes, and how these tribal nations are still here. They still exist. They still have sovereignty, and we're still interconnecting with those state governments. In Kansas, Chickasaws are not one of the native tribes to Kansas. Mm-hmm. But the 4 native reservations that are here, those groups control the oldest water rights in the state of Kansas. There's a reason for the state of Kansas to have interactions with all those tribes on a regular basis, to look at what we can do to work in harmony together to help take care of all the peoples of Kansas.
Wow. And you had made mention that, I guess my question for you is, as you were growing up, when did you start making those connections with your Chickasaw identity? What was it like to grow up in a family that is mixed race in Oklahoma? What is that experience like? It depends upon which part of Oklahoma that you're in. There are places in Oklahoma where, even at the time that I was growing up, being Native American was looked down upon. That there were, and at the same time, Oklahoma lifts their Native American population up and are proud to have had so many Native Americans there. And so there's this kind of banging against each other of these two ideas. And so you learn where are the places that it's okay to be proud of who you are, where are the places that you really should not. Oftentimes I found that as a child, my experiences outside of Oklahoma would be drastically different than what they were within the state. When I was in the 2nd grade and we were on a family vacation through the Southwest, and I think we may have been in Utah, we pulled into a gas station to get gas and to get out and go to the bathroom. This would have been, in the late 60s, early 70s. And at that time, you had to go see the station attendant, which oftentimes was the owner, especially in a small town, ask for a key to go around to the outside to the bathrooms to be able to go in. And as my dad and I walked in to get the key, the station owner looked at my dad and goes, "Y'all Injun?" And being from Oklahoma, my dad probably said, "Well, yes, we're Chickasaw." And the attendant said, or the owner said, "Y'all might be really nice people, but I just make it my policy to not let Injuns use my bathrooms." Oh. And then he looked into the car and saw my mom sitting there. My mom is very white, and my mom, and so white she's blue, but but
the thing is that he looked at my mom and he looks at my dad and says, is your wife white? And my dad said, yes. I said, well, she can use the restroom, but you and the kids will have to go someplace else. And, that sits heavy when you see that discrimination just because of the color of your skin. And I'm glad that we're talking about doing this as an audio thing, not necessarily a video thing, because you would look at my blonde hair and say, what? But this is not my natural color. I'm 58. Sure. I'll do what I want with my hair.
Absolutely.
But when you're sitting there with dark brown eyes, and you're sitting there with brown skin, and you're sitting there with hair that's so dark brown it's almost black, and then someone's telling you because of how you look, you can't use my bathroom. And if it only happened to me once, that would be enough. In 1982, I was in college and touring through Canada, our friendly neighbors to the north. And because of the nature of our band tour that we took, it was with the college band, kind of a recruiting tour for the college. Mm-hmm. We would go home with families and spend the night with them, and then reassemble at some high school the next day, and then load up the bus and move on to the next place. And so the first place we were staying in Canada, the family looked at me and they said, "Are you First Nation?" And I didn't know what the term First Nation meant in 1982. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, and I kind of stammered around. They said, "Oh, you say Native American in the States." I said, "Yes, I am Native American." And they looked at me and said, "You're going to be going to places in Canada where you will not be safe. If someone asks you if you are First Nations or Indigenous, you need to tell them no. You need to say to them that you're Spanish. You need to say to them you're Italian. Say to them that you are anything other than Native American, to something that would explain your olive-colored brown skin, your dark eyes, and your dark hair. Because if they say, 'Hey, are you First Nation?' and you say yes, they may drag you around the building and just beat you. Because there was that level of discrimination against First Nations back then in Canada. And so I carry those memories. I carry those emotions with me. And, I remember growing up in a neighborhood at a time when instead of playing, kids nowadays sometimes play, I don't know if they're playing gangs and cops anymore or what. But when we were kids, when I was a kid, it was cowboys and Indians. And, you'd see the whole neighborhood gather together for this game, and you'd see me riding out across the street on my bicycle, being chased by 6 people yelling, "Get them!" Because I was the Indian, and the rest of them were all cowboys. And so we kind of sometimes giggle at those things, but at the same time, it's kind of embedding discrimination and embedding racism into the mindset over and over and over again.
Absolutely. And when you were telling that story about when you were in Canada and this family was telling you, you need to hide.
Right.
Does that at all mirror your experience as a trans person or as a young person coming to terms with their gender? Is there some overlap in that Venn diagram, if that makes any sense?
Absolutely. There's total overlap in that. We do what we can to preserve ourselves. Mm. And so as a trans person, oftentimes I'm asked, so when did you decide that you were trans? Well, I didn't decide. I've always known, but the language may not have been there until I was of an age where I was able to articulate what I was feeling, what I was thinking. And then before I would say something to somebody, I needed to know that it was safe to say it. So for me, when I realized that I was different, I was in kindergarten. So think about the kindergartners, mm-hmm. And then put it in context with my age. This is in the 60s. And then think about how American civilization and culture was, especially around the LGBTQ community in the 1960s. Even my parents, who were very loving and very accepting, gave out all the different cues to let me know that it wouldn't be safe for me to say something. Now, I think if I had, my parents would have loved me and we would have figured it out. But at the time, I didn't know that. I assumed they were kind of like everybody else. So I kept it buried and kept it hidden for a very long time, because it just simply wasn't safe. It was you cannot be who you are, who you say you are, And I remember being in the 6th grade and seeing Dr. Renee Richards on an afternoon talk show. And if you don't know who Renee Richards is, she's a trans woman who sued to be able to play women's professional tennis back in the 70s. And so she was making the rounds on the different talk shows explaining her position. And of course, at that time, we didn't have cable TV. You went home, you watched one of 3 channels. Most likely you were watching reruns of Gilligan's Island or Star Trek or Bonanza. And if you'd already seen
Star Trek, if you're lucky,
shows, if you'd already seen all those shows, then you might watch like the Mike Douglas show, which is what I was doing. And when she was on, and she used the word to describe herself as a transsexual. That was eye-opening to me because I had no idea what that word was.
No language for it. No
language for it. And all of a sudden there was a word. And as she described her experiences, I was thinking, that's me. This is who I am. I've got a word now that describes who I am. So the next day, go to school. We're all talking about watching the show, sitting at our table there in language arts. And one of the kids at the table said, so she used to be a guy and now she's a girl. And everybody at the table nodded their heads yes. And said, so when she was a guy, she liked girls, but now that she's a girl, she likes guys. And of course, now we're talking that here's this great philosophical question we don't know the answer to. And we all looked to Bobby Irwin. And Bobby's dad was a psychologist. We all knew that his dad was Dr. Irwin was a psychologist. So that gave Bob implicit authority. This is what it's going to be. And Bob says, yes, that's the way it is. Like I said, we're in the 6th grade. We're all discovering our attractions to other people at this point in time in our lives.
Indeed.
And I, yes, Alexa's going off right now.
As she does.
Anyway, so we all look at Bob and he says, yes, that's exactly what that means, that she now likes guys. And I thought, but I don't like guys. I like girls. So I guess I'm not transsexual. And so that took a step back. It's like, well, okay, that doesn't make sense to me. I remember testing the waters later on with them and the same group of folks and talking with them about, in terms of science fiction, how cool it would be if someone would invent a machine that would allow you to like swap body parts with somebody. So, if they thought their nose was too small and you thought your nose was too big, you could swap noses. And the response from my think tank of 6th graders was to look at me and say, Byers, you're weird, which then shut me down and buried me a little bit deeper.
And this might be a silly question, but what kind of kid were you like in middle school and high school? Were you gregarious? Were you quiet? Were you creative? Who was that person then?
That was a person that lived in music. Music saved my life and saved my life over and over and over again. I wrote songs. I didn't always write them down, so I've forgotten a lot of them that I wrote. But I wrote songs. My guitar was my best friend. And the woman who is now my wife was my best friend. We've known each other since we were 10 years old. And so we've had that relationship that goes on forever. I was kind of withdrawn, but outgoing at the same time. So, everybody kind of knew, but they didn't know me. They knew a person. They knew this avatar that was out there that they saw functioning in this world. And whenever they would get close, I would kind of shut them down, kind of push them off a little bit. There were times in my life when I battled depression hard and heavy. I seem to remember that the summer between 5th grade and 6th grade, I never went outside. I stayed in my room and read. I read every book in the house, and then went, go to the library and get more books to come home and read. But that was my escape, was just simply not to be around anybody. But, when you think about what's happening between the 5th and 6th grade and biologically speaking, that's when most of us are entering into puberty. And, my body was kind of betraying me in some respects. And so it was kind of an escape for that. But friendly, outgoing. I was raised in a conservative Christian church. I was actively involved in the youth group. I was a leader in the youth group in so many respects. But because of my love for music and stuff like that. Would lead singing at church. I grew up in the Church of Christ. So at that time it was a cappella, and if you could sing, you were a rock star. So I had that going on. And I have 5 younger brothers, 4 natural and 1 foster brother. And so I'm the oldest. And so there was also that responsibility of being the third parent oftentimes. Because my youngest brother was 10 years younger than I am. And, so by the time I was 16 and he's going to T-ball practice, I'm the one who's driving him and picking him up and not mom and dad, but it was those things, and the whole time I'm doing this and living this life, I know who I am in secret. I know who I am in the dark. I know who I am in my dreams. I know who I am when I'm being able to be alone and be able to outwardly express who I am. Of course, in a house with that many kids, there's rarely a time when you are alone. Yes. And so it was a struggle. I was interviewed some time ago on a podcast, and when we were talking about this aspect of it, the person who was interviewing me said, "You must have been awfully lonely." And just about brought me to tears in that very moment, because yes, knowing your authenticity, knowing who you are at the core of your soul, and not being able to share that or express that with other people because it's not safe. Even in the 80s when I'm in college, I had classmates that would come in and talking about how on Friday night they had gone down somewhere in Oklahoma City and, quote, rolled a tranny, which meant they just ran up to them and knocked them down as hard as they could and ran off laughing. Those type of things were all over the place. And so it was important that to be safe, that you just not let anybody know. And that creates that loneliness, because your authenticity, who you are, you don't get to share. And so you kind of live vicariously through this avatar you've created on the other side of the wall of who you are.
And to go back to, you said that you were currently married to somebody that you've known since the age of 10. Is that somebody that you shared your truth with at that time when you were their friend, or did you share that with anybody at that time? Yeah,
Lori's the first person I came out to. And the best we can figure out is probably about the time we were 16 or 17 years old. And, she knew. And, if she were sitting here right now, she would tell you that even though I was her boyfriend back then, I was still kind of her girlfriend. And that when I came out to her, she kind of thought I was a unicorn, that there's nobody else kind of like this. We didn't really know what to do with it. After we graduated high school, our lives kind of took separate directions. And she began dating and eventually married someone else. I also began dating and eventually married someone else. And then in college, the stress of being who I am pushed me to a point where I went to the college psychologist, not a professor, but an actual psychologist on staff to work with students through mental health issues. And this would have been 1983. He put me through some personality tests and things like that, and through discussion, he goes, "Well, I'm pretty certain that you are transsexual." And
that word reappearing again.
Yeah. And I thought, oh my God, here I am, but I'm also in the middle of a Christian college where I'm trying to get a degree that would not look very highly upon this. And, and he's like, "It's okay. We're confident in here. This isn't going to go back to administration or anything like that. So, this is just between you and I." But his thing was, let's work on the guilt, and so instead of trying to say, let's fix your identity, his thing was, let's work on the guilt that you feel about being who you are. I had no idea what kind of a blessing that was at the time.
Yes.
And, it truly made a difference. And then after that meeting, I got hold of Lori, and we ended up, and I ended up at a state university library looking up textbooks, trying to find stuff. She ended up at a library looking up textbooks, trying to find stuff. And this is before cell phones too. So we're like calling each other, then going to the library, writing down notes, getting back together, calling each other again, and talking about these things. But even then, there wasn't a lot of literature about it. If you go on Amazon and Google transgender, it's amazing how many books are out there now. And, at that time, there wasn't anything. It was a few psychological textbooks, and they weren't necessarily as affirming as what we have now. But that's where it was. And then over the course of time, Lori and I kind of separated and went separate directions again. About every 10 years, we'd get back together. In 2009, 2010, she was going through a very bad divorce and reached out through social media to find me, so that, we could kind of reconnect as friends. She thought about who was the last person in my life that loved me unconditionally and came looking for me. And, when she got in touch with me, I was in a marriage that was spiraling downhill as well. And it took it a few more years. But my marriage ended as well. And then as I transitioned to live authentically, Lori moved from Houston to Wichita to give me a soft place to land. Mm-hmm. And we've, been together ever since, and got married in 2015. And, so.
Love stories like that don't happen every day. Wow. Now, when I'm speaking with people who have been on the podcast thus far, a part of my brain is always thinking, what question would my 80-year-old grandpa ask? and one of these questions in my head that I could hear him asking is, you're 16, 17, sitting in Oklahoma. Why was Lori so able to accept your truth? I would expect that she would be confused or hurt or angry. Why was she able to accept it so, I don't think easily is not the word I want to say. How was she able to accept it at that time and place?
I think there's a lot of things that go through our heads. A lot of us have our own secrets we keep. And, I'll probably ask forgiveness for this later. But a part of Lori's story is Lori is someone who is pansexual. Mm-hmm. And she didn't have the words for it, but she understood. She didn't know. She thought at that time that everybody just made a choice as to who they were attracted to.
Yep.
Because that was how she felt. She didn't understand that there were some people that their attractions were kind of confined to one gender or another. And so that may have had something to do with being able to accept me, because of the fact that she was already at that place, even if we didn't have the words for it, and it's something that we've both grown into, and because of those things that we experienced as kids, it kind of brings us to where we are now. Because at 58, Lori is a marriage and family therapist, and 80% of her clients are transgender people.
Wow.
Or they are the families of transgender people. Mm-hmm. And she is one of the few people in Wichita that is certified affirmative care therapist. She did postgraduate work to gain that certification.
Yep.
And it's a natural fit for her. And, you would think, but how many, this is what she specializes in, So you think, how can you have a practice in Wichita, Kansas? That would be such a small niche. And yet she's got too many clients. She gets referrals on a regular basis and has to find other therapists that are willing to take them, and that she feels comfortable in sending them to. And, because there is a huge need that we can guess that all the estimates of the percentage of population that's transgender, that whether it was from the Williams Institute out of California or it from some poll that's been taken care of by, the Transgender Law Center or whatever, they're wrong. They're all too small. The numbers are lower. The numbers are actually bigger than what we realize because they're all done by people willing to self-identify.
Yes.
And even now, a lot of trans folks do not feel safe in being able to say, this is who I am, even in an anonymous survey. Mm-hmm. And so those numbers they're deflated from where they should be. And who knows if we'll ever figure out a way to actually get those numbers. But hopefully we'll come to a point in life where we don't need to know the statistics. We just accept people for who they are.
Oof. I hope that day comes soon. Now, I can imagine that having a wife who is a marriage and family therapist would be helpful as you are coming out to your family members, your children, your coworkers. What was your experience like coming out?
That's another thing too. When we talk with kids a lot, we find that if you use that expression coming out to a middle schooler nowadays, they're like, what does that mean?
What am I coming out of? What am I coming into?
Yeah. The 7th grade gay boy that brought his boyfriend home for the first time just said, Mom, Dad, this is my boyfriend. They went, oh, okay. There was no coming out. And, and we know that's not the case for every family. But we see it more and more. We're getting to that point. For me, to be able to live authentically at so late a time in my career, in Kansas, like many places, as a public employee, when your age plus the number of years you've worked equals some magic number, you are eligible for retirement benefits. Mm-hmm. For me here in Kansas, that was 85. I had to have 85 points. So my age plus the number of years that I'd worked. So I knew where my date was when I would be able to retire. In 2014 was putting me 5 years before that date. And when I started trying to work through this in 2012, 2013, because I was at a point where I had to live authentically, I could no longer keep it bundled up inside, or I was not going to be breathing on this planet anymore. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I was looking at was what happens if my career in this district, this 24-year career, ends because of this. In Kansas, in 2012, teachers lost the right to due process. It had been in place since 1958, but we had a governor that was able to go through and push through the law that removed due process from public educators. So I had
That's absurd to hear.
I had lost that protection. Fortunately, my school district had continued to put that protection in our contracts.
Hey.
But I didn't know how set in concrete that was. So I felt around. The school district had a counseling service they provided, limited number of sessions, stuff like that, free of charge for teachers. And I reasoned that if that counseling service was available from the school district to help teachers, then perhaps I could use that counseling service to reconnect with the people on the school district side to see where their positions were regarding a teacher transitioning. I already have my own therapist, so I went to this counseling setup. And as I was talking with the therapist that worked for the school district, that was contracted by the school district, I explained to her what I needed, and she agreed that she could be a liaison. And so we began working through how the school district would respond with a teacher who was transitioning. And the whole, hypothetical teacher is going to transition from male to female. How will the district respond with this? And after kind of going through that for a few sessions, I kind of became impatient. I said, I appreciate everything you've done, but I'm going to go directly to the people you've been talking to. And so I sent an email to the Equal Employment Opportunities Officer for the district. And I said, I'm that hypothetical teacher. What are we talking about? What's going to happen? and told him, I said that honestly, this emotional stress, this emotional exhaustion of not being able to live authentically is going to take me off this planet if we don't do something. And in the summer of 2014, I'm living in Manhattan, Kansas, even though my home's here in Wichita, finishing up or trying to finish up a master's degree. And I get a phone call from that gentleman. And the first thing he says to me is, I want to talk to you about your transition. And I have your principal on the phone. Oh. And my immediate thought was, that's it. I'm fired. I'm done. And in a large school district, they don't have to fire you. They can do things like, because you're not assigned to a specific school, they can move you to a less desirable work environment. They can do things to encourage you to, resign. And I just kind of thought, this is where this is headed. And then my buddy, my principal, Sherman Padgett, gets on the phone and goes, I thought we were friends. How did I not know this about you? And then the conversation started from there. He said, how can we help? What can we do? And, in the course of that, I found out that I had started transitioning hormonally 5 years before. Mm-hmm. You can hide a lot of things, but a tight T-shirt with a baggy polo over it does not hide budding breasts as well as you might think it does, And so some people kind of figured it out at school. And, he had gone to his secretary and said, we have a teacher who's transitioning and I don't even know who it is, and that secretary is a good friend of mine, looked at him and said, Sherman, it's Byers. And Sherman's like, well, Byers rides a motorcycle. Byers shows up in leather. Byers is like, yeah. And she's like, yeah. And have you not noticed Byers in a sweater?
Yeah.
And so those doors started opening up. And of course, at that time, Lori is out of state still, and we're talking with each other. We're calling each other. So it was there, and she hadn't completed her degree yet at that point in time. She was still working on her bachelor's degree in community health. So, but like I said, I have my own therapist here in town, so I was able to have that support. When they said that, we're going to make this happen for you. We've talked with the school district lawyers. They're behind this. They say that they can support this. That, I'm like, the lawyers. You've already. That's not. You probably should not lead off saying we talked to the lawyers. But they talked to the lawyers, and then said, then we've talked to the school board. And at the time, I knew most of the members of the school board as personal friends. In that case, at that time, the president of our school board. All three of his kids had been through my band program. So, it's more than just, I know who you are kind of things. And so they said, and so after telling me all these things, I said to them, you need to understand something. I said, I need to take a couple of weeks before I give you an answer of what we're going to do. Because, this has been this dream and this has been a need for me. Because I never knew if it would come through or not, there are some loose ends I have to tie up. I have 2 adult sons. They don't know. I need to talk with them. Mm-hmm. My parents knew. Not because I told them, but because my ex-wife had outed me to them.
Okay. So this is something that you had shared with your ex-wife. What was the thinking behind, I'm going to go behind your back and talk to your parents?
At the time, we were separated. We weren't divorced. And she was visiting with my mom and dad and was struggling, was emotionally struggling. And my mom would go and say, what's the matter? What's going on? And she would respond, you just don't understand. It has to do with I'll use my dead name, but it has to do with Steve. And you just want to understand. And then finally, my mom walked in to her and said, and her name, ironically, is Jimmy, but that's her given name. But my mom went in and said, Jimmy, Paul and I, my dad, Paul and I, we know. And that's all she said. And as soon as she said that, then my ex opened up and just said everything about the fact that I was anticipating transitioning, that, I had an entire wardrobe hidden away in the closet. It was just one thing after another. And then my mom emailed me later that day that with an email that started off with, "This is the hardest letter I've ever had to write." And he told me what all had been said and just finished with, we want you to know that your father and I love you no matter what. And we are so sorry that you've had to walk this walk by yourself for so long. It really opened those doors up. When it came to talking to my two sons, I wrote a long letter because I wanted to make sure all my thoughts were there, not stumbled around on words. And I took both the kids out for hamburgers, and we were sitting in a fast food hamburger joint, and I'm handing them these letters. And my oldest son, both my sons are brilliant, and I know every parent says that, but my kids really, truly are. And my oldest son raced through the letter and looked at me and said, "I'm surprised that you thought we'd have a problem with this. After all, you raised us." And then my youngest son, who'd only gotten through like the first half of the first page, because he reads extremely slow. His comprehension level is postgraduate level when he was in the 7th grade, but he does not read fast. And he's like, "Yeah, I get the gist of it." And I said, "No, we're not going to talk until you get the whole letter read." And so, we had that discussion about what all this meant. And, that was also when they found out what was going on between their mom and I. And that part was upsetting to them, but my transition wasn't. They were supportive. My parents were supportive. Of my brothers, one had passed away back in the 90s. And of the 4 remaining natural brothers, and my foster brother kind of walked out of our lives a little bit. But I had one who was affirming, one who was like, "Okay, I get this, we're good." And then my youngest brother rejected me flat out. Would have nothing to do with me. If my name was mentioned, he would burst into screaming fits. And it just wasn't pleasant. And that's being mild about it. And unfortunately, he also succumbed to cancer. And so we never had that opportunity to connect other than through my mom. And, one of the last things he told my mom was, he uses my dead name and says, "Tell, Steve that I love him and I know that he loves me." And after he passed, my sister-in-law also let me know that that they were going to honor Matt's wishes and I wasn't welcome at the funeral.
Why do you think he reacted that way?
I was his parent. I was his third parent.
Yep.
And something happened after my parents moved to Arizona, because my parents live out there, and he moved out there with them as a kid. And that a family that had been socially conservative but politically liberal, he took the social conservative and made it political conservative too. And so I really don't know where in all of this falls, and I'll never know, but that was just what happened, So and of my brothers that are still living, like I said, I've got one that he voted for Trump, but he loves me and hugs me every time he sees me. And then I've got another brother who won't bring his kids to see me because he's afraid they'll say something that will offend me. That he supports me and he worries about me. He uses my right name, uses my right gender, but he's still kind of unsure, and maybe with time we'll get that worked out. I don't know.
Do you think you would be offended by whatever they might or may not say? Or
I wouldn't be. It wouldn't bother me any. because I've been living authentically since 2014, and actually even before then. Just it was what we would refer to as part-time, I guess. Mm-hmm. But his kids are little, You know, they're what, 5 and 7 now, and I'm not too worried about what they would or wouldn't say.
Yeah.
You know, it is what it is.
And I mean, being a state legislature, a lawmaker, I'm sure I can only imagine, and of course, please correct me if I'm wrong, I can only imagine that you've heard some unkind things in that setting.
Yeah. I get some unkind things once in a while emailed to me. I received a package, I don't know, February or March, that was with a book on how to fix being homosexual. They had all kinds of Bible tracts in it, and was sent to me anonymously. But honestly, it doesn't happen that much. And when it does happen, it's interesting. There's a conservative radio broadcaster here in town, a guy named John Whitmer. And when I was running for election, he managed to make sure that he would tweet out something about when the newspaper would run a story about me running for office. He would tweet, "Yeah, we'll be hearing from this guy for a while."
Oh no!
But the thing is he sent that out, and before anybody on my team, I don't really have a campaign staff, right? But before any of us could respond and say something, other people in the community did, including sending letters to the radio station that employed him saying, "You need to know what this man has said." And next thing I know, the tweet is gone.
Mm-hmm.
A story would run on me in the Wichita Eagle, our local paper, and it would run on their social media page, and where you see all the comments, and there would be 1,000 likes on the story about me, and like 30 or 40 people with sad faces or angry faces. And someone would misgender me in the public comment section on that. And then there would be a whole host of people that would say, "You don't know her."
Mm. And
part of that were people that were former students. You teach someplace for 28 years, 29 years, and you've got thousands of people in the community that actually were in your room, were in your class. Part of it were their friends, part of it were other people that had met me along the way. And even in the case of my election, not knowing how a trans woman's going to fare, even in a Democratic-leaning district like mine, and obviously I ran as a Democrat, but not really knowing how the results are going to be, and the fact that I won 55.4 to 44.6%, and experienced candidates don't get that much of a margin of win, oftentimes, and it's saying something about conservative Kansas. It says something, at least about the area that I live in.
It does.
And those we see those things are changing, and they're changing slow, but they are changing. And sometimes I just I don't have the time to wait for them to change as slowly as they're moving. We need to make sure these changes are taking place.
I hear that. And as somebody, I am 27 years old. I am. There's a certain level of jadedness I have about politics. Can you talk to me a little bit about what it's like being a transgender woman deciding to get into politics? What's behind that decision, and what was that kind of journey? Is journey the right word? I don't know. What was that journey, that transition into politics? What was that like?
Politics exists in all kinds of levels.
Oof.
As a high school band director, I had politics. I knew that there were people that wanted to see my percussion section showcase at everything we did, and that kind of took away from the rest of the band. So how did I balance that out? Well, it's politics. You make those choices, you make those decisions. you do these things, kind of keep things moving forward. And it moving from being a high school band or orchestra director into politics with a 5-month wait between the two, because I retired, stopped teaching, did not really know what I was going to do, other than I was helping my wife out with her practice where I could here and there. Turns out I'm not as good at billing as I'd like to be. But we did those things, and even took a month and went to Bangkok. Spent a month in Bangkok. Medical tourism. We won't go there, but we'll talk. The listeners can guess. But and I came back, and I was the communications director for Wichita Pride. I serve on the board of directors for Wichita Pride. And Wichita is different. We host our Pride celebration in September, because it's Kansas. June is 100 degrees. Oof. September is 85. So, we'll go as a little bit more comfortable. But I was communications director, and we were staging for our Pride parade in September of 2019. My mom and dad had come into town to help us out. Because of all the members of the Pride board, my wife and I are the ones with a pickup. We had tons of water, literally 2 tons of water in the back end of our truck, and a whole pallet of 16-ounce water bottles, so that we didn't want anybody to not be hydrated for this parade. And so we're passing water out. My mom's going through the crowd that's staging for this parade, handing them water bottles. And every time she would hand them a bottle of water, she would say, "Hi, I'm Steph's mom," and just walk away. And then finally she came up to where I was talking with, and I mentioned earlier that our school board president, when I transitioned, was Lynn Rogers. In 2016, Lynn Rogers became Senator Rogers for the state Senate in Kansas. And then in 2018 became Lieutenant Governor Rogers for the state of Kansas. Mm-hmm. And now in 2021, he is State Treasurer Rogers. So he is, somebody that I've known for a while. And so I was going to drive he and his wife. I have a convertible, and I was going to drive them in the parade. So my mom came around after handing water out to 1,000 different people, comes up to the Rogers and myself and hands them bottles of water. And I said, "Mom, what are you doing?" And she told me. I said, "Mom, there are 1,000 people here. Maybe 150 people know who Steph is. I'm hoping that you're not confusing them." And she goes, "Well, think of it this way. I'm campaigning for you." And I said, "Mom, I'm not running for anything
yet."
That's what she said. She goes, "Well, you never know." And then she walked off again. And then during the parade, the Rogers riding in my car, and as a band director during a parade, you're running through your band, making sure everybody's shoelaces are tied. You're making sure kids aren't going to run out in front of the bass drums to grab some piece of candy because bass drummers aren't going to see it. It's very active. Driving a car in a parade, you're just trying not to run over the people ahead of you. Really pretty easy. So we're having this conversation, and they are brainstorming all the different offices that they thought I would be a good fit to run for. To run for, the city council, run for the school board, maybe just start off easy and be a precinct chairperson, and just naming all these different things. And so then after the festival was over that day and the Pride board is all back together, we're kind of decompressing the day and debriefing on what went well, what didn't go well. And I mentioned what had happened with my mom, what had happened with the Rogers. And our board president looks at me and says, "You live in House District 86. And Jim Ward, who had been the representative of House District 86, has announced he's running for the state Senate. So he has relinquished that seat. So that's an open seat. If you want to run for state house, talk to me about it, and we'll see what we can do." And he's a longtime Politico, so somebody to bounce some ideas off of. And waited a few days and went and talked to him a little bit, found out what it's like to actually be a state legislator, what the job really entails as opposed to what we think it might, going through all of those things. And
At the same time of doing this, I get a phone call from GLSEN National saying there's a Supreme Court rally taking place on the sidewalk, hosted by the ACLU, called Don't Roll Back Our Rights, on October the 8th. And we would like for you to come be our voice at that rally. And what the Supreme Court was hearing on October the 8th were the oral arguments on Bostick versus Clayton County. The decision for Title VII of the 64 Civil Rights Act that does say that where it says on the basis of sex, it actually does include gender identity and sexual orientation. So I'm standing on the sidewalk, flown out there, on that day, a week and a half after having this conversation about possibly running for office. And I've got a huge group of protesters to the left of me, saying it's about biology, not about identity, screaming this out. Across the street is my friends, Westboro Baptist Church. I use friends loosely.
My good friends as well.
They now have protested me a couple of different times. Me directly one time for sure, because they showed up at North High School after I got the GLSEN National Award. But and then my own crowd standing in front of me. And, the person that spoke just ahead of me was, and I can't think of his name, but the first NBA player to come out as gay.
Yes.
Yeah. So, here's this person that's a foot and a half taller than me, speaking ahead of me. Transgender supermodel Gina Rocchero is in the crowd. Mm-hmm. And I'm standing there at this microphone, getting ready to address them, with the U.S. Supreme Court building behind me. Amy Stevens and her lawyers had just gone past a few minutes before. And across this park is the dome of the U.S. Capitol building, and I'm thinking, if this thing is speech, I could run for office and actually maybe make a difference. Besides trying to persuade somebody this way, maybe I can actually put it on paper.
Yes.
And put it out that way. And I came back home and met with, my consultants and said, okay, what's the first step? How do we make this happen?
What does a day in the life of a Kansas State Congresswoman look like?
If we're talking during session, I would love to say that I get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and I go to the gym. No, that's not me.
No.
But I try to get into the office by 8:30, and I start looking at what legislation is going to be coming through a committee. Serve on 3 different committees. I'm on the Kansas House Committee for Water, and the Kansas House Committee on Education, which is mostly policy. And then I'm on the Kansas House K through 12 Education Budget Committee, which is really looking at how the funds are spent, how they're used, things like that. And so I would go in and bring up all the bills that we could potentially be hearing in committees those days, and start reading through them and trying to make sure I understood what the gist of it was, and where it was coming from. Oftentimes, especially during COVID, we were doing things by WebEx, which is kind of the governmental version of Zoom. And so we would do it by that way. You'd have written testimony, so you get pages and pages. And so it's a lot of reading and it's a lot of highlighting. If we knew that we were going to be on the House floor, because the House doesn't meet every day, oftentimes they're just, all they're doing is a formality of introducing a bill. They're not actually debating it. So on those days, then I would try to read up on those bills as well. My caucus then would have a Zoom meeting or an in-person meeting to talk about those bills before they hit the floor, or we could ask questions of people that served on those committees those bills were going to, so that we'd have a good idea of what it was. And you work Monday through Thursday, sometimes on Fridays, sometimes on Saturdays. And, when debate starts on a bill on the House floor, it might be short and you're adjourned in time for lunch. Or it might go on and you're calling your office assistant saying, can you pick me up a sandwich and bring it up here?
Yeah.
The day that we heard the ban on trans girls in sports bill, that day started at 10 a.m. on the House floor, and it didn't end until 1 a.m.
Oof.
And so, the matter of fact that the bill on the trans girls sports ban didn't even hit the floor until after 10 p.m. And sadly, there's not a record of the debate that went on. We use YouTube Live, and YouTube Live stops archiving after 12 hours. And so the state IT team was told 2 years ago that they need to start a new YouTube recording in the afternoon, just to be on the safe side. And so that way it would continue on through. And this time around, somebody dropped the ball and didn't do it. And so even though YouTube Live was there, so if anybody actually tuned in, they could see it, the archived recording of what actually took place doesn't exist.
And I can only imagine, let me just ask this. What is it like being a lawmaker sitting in that room as people are debating this anti-trans sports, girls in sports bill? They're talking about you.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people who might be misinformed about being trans, or really, that was a really nice way to say it, people who might be hateful, they often are afforded the privilege of being able to say their hateful things without ever, when that person that they're being hateful to is not even near the room. That's not the case here. What did that feel like? What was that like?
I grew up here in that nursery rhyme of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I can tell you that words don't just hurt emotionally, they hurt physically. That you feel it in your joints, you feel it in your bones, you feel it, and for days afterwards. It's not, in months afterwards. It doesn't end. Here in Kansas, we have, Midwestern politeness, and so people are telling you, I love you. I just don't think that, and they do their best to try not to say the word transgender. So they'd say biological boys, and they'll give you all these stats about, how biological boys run faster than Olympian women. And it's just this constant thing, one after another, and part of the structure of that debate is knowing when is the time to push your button to speak to the bill and timing it so that you think that you can get the last word in.
Yeah.
Or is it time to get the preemptive word in, and trying to make those decisions. And with the Democrats in the state house in Kansas being the super minority, we had to very carefully judge and gauge how we were going to gauge how we're going to approach this. I am not the only queer person that serves in the state legislature. I have Brandon Woodard, who is openly gay, and I have Susan Ruiz, who's openly lesbian. And we made up the team that was going to go forward and speak. And we had other Democrats that wanted to go up and speak, but our Democratic leadership had them take a seat because they didn't want to take away from our message. And with me being transgender, mine was the last word. So that we could kind of talk this through. And I don't remember all of what I said, but I said things to the 125 people in that room about, I said, I don't know your hearts, but most of you, I assume that your gender identity, who you know yourself to be, and the sex that was assigned to you at birth align. That is something I will never experience. Mm-hmm. That's something I have never known. And we had kind of small lessons on what it means to be transgender, and of course people are like saying, I just want to make sure that my granddaughters are treated fairly if they choose to play sports. They don't have to compete against people on, and I'm up there saying, we can talk about grandkids. I've got 9.
Yeah.
We'll compare grandkids. I can tell you that my 6 granddaughters will stand toe to toe with any boy, and it doesn't matter to them, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about trans girls. And, whether a girl is trans or cis, she deserves the opportunity to participate in athletics. And we talk about fear. We talk about, fear mongering. We talked about discrimination. And the things that happen during are one thing, and we managed to have enough Republicans vote with us that even though the bill was passed in the House, it was not passed with the 2/3 majority. A 2/3 majority would make it veto-proof. So we were able to stop the 2/3 majority both on the Kansas House and the Kansas Senate side.
And was it vetoed?
And it was vetoed.
Ooh, all right.
They vetoed it. Then it went back to us for veto session. And since the bill originated on the Senate side, it started off in veto session on the Senate side. And it came down to one vote. The final person to vote in the Senate on that bill, we weren't sure which way they were going to vote.
Oh, my Lanta.
And pretty sure that he wasn't sure which way he was going to vote until his very last sentence when he was speaking, and then said, I vote to sustain the governor's veto. So, yeah, and those of us that are in the advocacy side of LGBTQ politics here in Kansas, we're still feeling that one vote. We know how close it was.
Yes.
And the fact that the lawmakers that brought that bill to the floor vow to bring it back in January. And not just that one, we're looking at a Kansas version of the Arkansas ban on affirmative health care for trans kids.
Yep.
We're seeing both of those. We're seeing the possibility of legislation that would preempt local governments from enacting non-discrimination ordinances. So if Wichita can get theirs done, January or February, the state legislature may set it up so no other locality can do the same. And, it's frustrating, but, and yeah, there is something when people are saying things that directly apply to you. And not just some bubble out there,
Yes.
During the debate, I had a couple of Republicans emailing me, asking me what to do, how they were going to vote, how they were torn. The day after debates, I had Republicans meet me in the elevator and apologize and say, we didn't want to see this come to the floor. We didn't want to vote on it. And I'm like, then why did you allow it to happen?
Yeah.
I had Republicans come to me and say, our party is split over these things. And those of us that are younger disagree with the older. And I'm like, then have some backbone and stand up and say, we disagree. And I think the worst was the Representative Wassinger that carried this bill to the floor and presented it to the House, came to me, I don't remember, a couple of weeks later, asked to meet in my office, and spent 45 minutes talking with me, trying to make sure that I understood that she is not a bad person. And of course, as a teacher, it's easy for me to go, there are no bad people, just bad actions.
Yeah.
But it's like, but you took that action. And as a grown person, you could have made that choice. And she's like, well, I just want to make sure that my granddaughters. And I said, what if your granddaughters turn out later to their grandsons?
Yep.
You don't know. And what you have done by saying this is you've made sure they understand it's not safe for them to ever actually be themselves with you, if that is the case.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line is we're talking about relationships. We're talking about how you relate with somebody else in your sports team.
Yes,
how you relate
we're talking about people.
Yep, exactly.
Yep. I am overwhelmed by, I can only imagine it's such a burden to be approached by all these different peoples from all these different viewpoints. And they're saying to you, the trans woman, explain to me how I can be right. Explain all this stuff to me. Do you see it as is what I described anywhere near the truth?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Yep. The state rep who's now running for state treasurer, Stephen Johnson, met with me when the bill first hit the floor in what's known as an agree to disagree, because of something between the Senate and the House wasn't lined up. He didn't vote on that one. And then he met with me and he said, explain this to me. He says, I'm from Asteria, Kansas, little town. I've got a friend who's gay, but I really don't understand beyond that. Talk to me about this.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a job that my wife and I have done forever. We go and we educate people on gender identity, and with a company called Gender.Training. And so, but in 15 minutes, the state legislator, and I'm like, I wish the science were completely clear on all of this. But the truth of the matter is that because it's such a small population, it hasn't really been looked at. And we've got people that are grandiosing elements of science, but not going through the entire scientific process and saying all aspects of it. But I said, bottom line is we're not actually talking about somebody winning a gold medal or winning a race or taking the first place. We're talking about people's lives.
Yes.
And in the state of Kansas, because of the way our secondary association is set up, if someone's going to be participating in athletics as a gender other than what's on their birth certificate, they have to declare that gender at the beginning of the season. Once they declare, they are not allowed to shift that gender until after graduation from high school. So if someone runs track as a boy, as a sophomore, and then their junior year they come out and they're a trans girl, then they're going to be running as a trans girl in their senior year also.
Yep.
But because that process has to be gone through, it has to be approved. And the head of the Kansas State High School Secondary Association, I called him. I said, how many kids are we talking about in Kansas? How many approvals have you made? He goes, I'll have to look and see. I've done a few, but I don't remember there being very many. Then he called me back that afternoon and said, we have 5. So 5 trans athletes in the entire state of Kansas, 100,000 kids in athletics, 5 kids are trans.
Mm-hmm.
And we're spending hours debating over this.
Yep.
But it's not about the kids. It is for me. It is for Susan Ruiz. It is for Brandon Woodard, because we know we're defending those kids' lives. For the other side, it's about scoring political points. It's about, for giving some reason to create an uproar in their base. And we're still seeing it. Like I said, I was at this meeting for our Wichita's non-discrimination ordinance. And the biggest complaint, the biggest question, what bathroom is a trans woman going to use if we pass a non-discrimination ordinance?
And that's the big thing that everyone's got to, make a big stink about.
Right. And it's a way of dividing people instead of trying to unite people.
I couldn't agree more. And I think we can say, this is about bathrooms. This is about people's safety. When really what they're saying is trans people terrify us and make us feel uncomfortable to the point where we'll do crazy stuff. We'll do wild things. But at any rate, I digress.
You're fine. But, if we're talking about trans athletics, it's not, like I said, it's not about trophies. It's not about who can shoot the most free throws. It comes down really to being licensed to discriminate.
Yes.
And they have bench tested this idea so well, focus grouped it so well, that trans women in sports even has a following within trans women who say, no, trans women shouldn't compete with cis women in sports. It's a small group, but it's a group.
And they found them and they said, here's 25 microphones, go for it.
Yep, exactly.
Yep.
And then you see things like Laurel Hubbard in the Olympics, who, can't complete her lifts, so she doesn't get to advance on. And, now it's like, oh, well, she tried, blah, 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 blah. But, the thing about it is they forget that Laurel Hubbard went in the Olympics ranked 4th. But if you actually look at her rankings internationally before the Olympics, with outside of Olympic rules, she ranked like 18th in the world. It wasn't like she was going to dominate the sport anyway.
Yeah. Not to switch gears a little bit, everyone I've spoken with, we've had kind of like a fire, a thunder, like a lightning rounds of questions, right?
Right.
And I was wondering if you felt comfortable participating in that as well.
Sure.
I sense through the computer screen some trepidation.
No, I'm just worried about me condensing my answers to short answers.
Okay, well, hey, we'll see where we land, right? What do you think is the biggest difference between younger and older LGBTQ folks?
The biggest difference is the understanding of what it means with coming out.
What do you mean?
Well, society has changed. Yes. We're a more accepting society. And so younger generations may not understand the angst of the older folks when they came out, when they chose to come out, unless they're coming out now.
Yes.
And a lot of older folks are coming out now. And so they're also enjoying this more relaxed time. I wish it were all the way relaxed. We're not there yet. But there is a big difference for those folks that are coming out now versus those that came out in the 70s and the 80s, 90s.
And I think it's important that we remember that. What do you feel about younger people using the word queer?
I'm fine with it. I just hope they understand, too, that there are older generation that find that word offensive.
Yep.
And that the older generation understands that we as a community are in the process of reclaiming that word.
Yes.
And that word is more flexible in meaning. So when we talk about the letters, we talk about LGBT, those have pretty firm definitions. But when we introduce Q, queer can refer to our sexuality, it can refer to our gender identity, it can refer to our relational work. It just simply means that I differ than what is perceived as the usual.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever used a dating site or application?
No.
I got a million things to say. Betty Davis or Joan Crawford?
Oh, Betty Davis.
Who could say Joan Crawford? Well, okay, I love them both. Well, your first celebrity crush?
Jamie Lee Curtis.
Like Halloween, Jamie Lee Curtis?
Yeah, and maybe her dad too.
I hear that. Spartacus. What makes you happy?
Oh, sunshine on my shoulders. I find joy in all kinds of things. I find joy in the daily, and I oftentimes it doesn't show on my face. I have a very flat affect. Ben Affleck, that's on my face. But it doesn't really show a lot of emotion. But I find happiness in patterns of color. I find happiness in the laughter of kids. In music, I find happiness in the feeling of a breeze on my shoulder. It's there.
It sure is. What gives you hope?
That things are changing in the right direction. And even though it seems like we took a bunch of steps back over the last 4 years, that's not necessarily the truth.
Yes.
We've seen an increase. I think we've seen an increase of the shadows around us, but we have not moved backwards. We are standing further forward. We have to create more light to overcome the shadows now.
An amazing metaphor. What is the best age?
The age you are.
Oof. You get to have dinner with 3 people, alive or dead. Who are they?
Kristen Chenoweth.
Oklahoma native.
Yeah, I think she's on the top of my list. Pete Buttigieg.
Mm-hmm.
And on the third end, Jenny Boylan.
Ugh. And okay, as much as I'm interested in talking to Pete Buttigieg, I want to talk to Chasten. You know, there's an interesting story in there too.
Yes, there is.
They're totally. What's your favorite fast food?
Breakfast burrito.
Good answer. I feel like I'm on Family Feud. Good answer. Good answer. Good answer. What part of aging has bothered you the most?
I don't know necessarily if it's my aging or if it's just because of my body, but I have lupus.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hurt. My joints hurt. And I think that, but tied in with it, that's really bothered me the most, waiting to live authentically until I was 51 years old. I don't know that I could have done it earlier with my particular life, the way everything worked out around. But I love the fact that I'm able to be myself. It just seems like it's been for such a short time.
What part of aging has brought you the most joy?
Grandchildren.
What would you bring to a potluck dinner?
I make a really wicked homemade breadstick.
Okay, like yeast action in there?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm jealous. I just bought a whole pack of yeast and some organic all-purpose flour. I said, I'm going to learn how. So, okay, I'll be hitting you up for that recipe. You've answered so many of my questions. If you had one question for me, what would it be?
What brought you to this idea of doing a podcast?
My mom is the president of our local PFLAG for my hometown, which is a whole story in there too. The people who were showing up to these PFLAG events were not parents and friends of lesbians and gays. And if I massacred the PFLAG acronym, I apologize. They were people, they were LGBTQ older adults. And I'm listening to them speak and I'm going, holy shit. You know, somebody's got to hear this shit. Somebody's got to hear this stuff. Millions of people need to hear this stuff. So then I walk into work and I go, hey, what if we had a podcast where we speak with LGBTQ older adults? And they say, go for it. And that's my story. Not to gas up my employer too much because I don't want to look like a goody two shoes, but I'm very grateful to be able to do that in as means of employment.
Very cool.
It's incredible, but I am absolutely awful at this part, but I'm going to do my best. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me and having interest in sharing your story, your stories with the public at large. I can only imagine that the world is a better place for it. So thank you for doing that with us.
Well, and thank you for asking me and having me.
Go ahead.
We've talked about me being Native American, but the other side of my family is Irish. And, in both cultures, it's said that every generation produces a storyteller. And when it came in together for me, I kind of get it from both sides. So I didn't really get much of a choice.
Yeah, double whammy. Yeah. Well, fantastic. Thank you for being a storyteller with us today. We want to give a special thanks to Stephanie Byers for joining us today. And if you or someone you know is interested in being a guest on the show, email thegayestgeneration@aadl.org.